morning, good afternoon, evening to all that have joined us from all over the world. And thank you for being with us here today. I'm Josh Truman, Vice President of Partnerships here at Convergence Tech, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Howard Behar. But before I share a bit about his background, Howard, I'd actually love to offer you a cup of coffee, and I'll just pass that over to you if you wouldn't mind grabbing that cup.
Thank you very
Oh,
much. Appreciate it.
I did leave it black. Hopefully, if you need coffee, cream and sugar, you're on your own.
Okay, that's all right.
But now back to our scheduled programming. Just a little bit about Howard. I'd like to kind of share. Howard's career in business spans over 50 years, and most recently as a speaker, an advisor, a mentor, board member, and best-selling author. Howard is someone who led Starbucks for over 20 years. And he's one of the key leaders through its hyper growth period, taking it from only a few employees to over thousands all over the world. His wisdom, generosity, and level of integrity have had a profound impact on thousands of people who have been touched by his examples, his books, and his words. And two of his books actually caught my attention. It's not about the coffee and the magic cup, but it's really his work around servant leadership that actually drew us to this conversation today. He's a servant leader himself and is passionate about teaching the concepts of servant leadership. So I just couldn't wait to talk to Howard today. And for our audience, as you come up with questions for Howard, please put them into the Q&A chat box, and we'll definitely spend the last time we have together with Howard putting him in the hot seat. So Howard, thank you for joining me today. And if it's all right with you, I'd love to dig into the topic of servant leadership. And thinking about servant leadership, which from what I've gained is and understood is that the theme not only of the magic cup, but really being focused on putting people first and values first. And I'd love to hear you tell us a little bit why you're so passionate about it, and also how you adopted it as your leadership philosophy.
Well, let's start with the last question first. So when I was in my mid-20s, a guy that I reported to gave me this little booklet called The Leader as Servant. It was written by Robert Greenleaf, who was the person who coined the term servant leadership. And that began my journey. I kind of was, the words were right for me because I was already acting kind of in a way of a servant leader, but I didn't really understand what I was doing. I was an unconscious competent, so to speak. And that began my journey of studying servant leadership and studying Robert Greenleaf's work and studying other people's work on servant leadership. And over time, I became more and more interested in it. And I realized that the most important person I'd ever have to lead was me. And when I got that down, then I said, maybe I can start helping other people. And so that's what I did. And that was 50 years ago. And I've been a student ever since of servant leadership. And the good thing about servant leadership is you're always learning something new. So that's how I began, and I've stayed with it all these years. And the reason I've stayed with it is that it's the way I want to live my life primarily, right? I mean, servant leadership is more than just a leadership style. It's a way of living. And it's the fact that, we help other people get what they want out of their lives. And so doing, we get what we want out of our lives. And that's the way that it works. And I have found that it's the most productive way of leading organizations. It's what brings people together, and it makes people feel part of the organization and cared about. And that's what I have done throughout my whole life.
Well, it's really interesting, and the more I learn about your life and about the philosophy, the more excited I get. I'm curious. When it comes to servant leadership, it's clearly not just being about being kind and doing the right thing for people. No. There's got to be challenges when it comes to running an organization, when it comes to holding folks accountable. Can we talk a little bit about that and how those come together?
Yeah, there's a misconception that servant leadership is a soft, be gentle, be nice, never criticize anybody, never hold anybody accountable. It's the opposite of that. Servant leadership is about performance. It's about getting the job done. It's just not getting the job done on the backs of people, but with people. But yeah, absolutely. To be a good servant leadership, you have to set goals. You have to move towards those goals. You have to hold yourself and people accountable, but it's done in a way that uplifts people, not degrades people. And that works. If you think about it, in our home lives, right? If we treat people with respect and dignity, and we show that we care about them, then they act that way towards ourselves. And after all, that's what we're trying to do in our society, right? Although there's times when I don't think we get it, you know, particularly in today's world.
Agreed. I guess on top of that question, you were a part of the growth of Starbucks from, a few employees to being a global organization. And when it comes to servant leadership, how do you get a global organization to embrace that and make it the way of life for Starbucks?
Well, first of all, you have to educate and develop people about servant leadership. They have to understand what it means. And, you don't have to use the word servant leadership. Those are the words Robert Greenleaf. Some people use the words transformative leadership. Some use the words conscientious leadership. I don't care what the words you use. It's just the idea of how we treat each other and how we serve each other. And so that is how it worked with inside of Starbucks. And, the only way you do it is by talking about it all the time and by
Mhm.
acting, right? You can't just talk. You have to act as a servant leader. And then you have to hold people accountable to act in the same way. Is it perfect? No. Does everybody do it all the time? No. But we did that. And, probably, I don't know how many thousands of speeches I gave or talks I gave with inside of Starbucks, but it was always about people and how we treated each other. It was people first, coffee second. And, I just drove that home, and you have to be relentless about it. And what I found, I was the founding president of Starbucks International. So I opened stores in almost 50 countries around the world. And I found that servant leadership translated very well. Didn't make any difference what language you spoke, what your culture was, but how you treated each other was really important. If you treated people with respect and dignity in Japan, it worked. If you treated people with respect and dignity in Greece, it worked. If you treated people with respect and dignity in the UK, it worked. If you treated people with respect and dignity in Peru, it worked. And it's worked.
I love it. I'm curious if you wouldn't mind. When you began thinking and learning about servant leadership, and you read this book by Robert Greenleaf, was there moments when you just thought, "Wow, this is really it"? Like that took place at Starbucks. That you kind of focused on people, focused on the values. That really was kind of one of those aha moments for you. Do you have one of those moments, or several maybe?
Well, before I was a servant leader, long before I got to Starbucks, I was in my mid 40s by the time I got to Starbucks. So I was pretty well formed, and I brought servant leadership or the concepts of it to Starbucks. And so, was there an aha moment? I guess the aha moment for me was that if I led myself with servant leadership concepts. In other words, I treated myself well. I wasn't abusive to myself, right? That it made a difference in how I felt. And so, and I started doing the same thing to others, and it made a difference in how they felt and how they felt about me and how they felt about the organization. And it was more iterative that rather than this, all of a sudden I woke up one day and said, I get it. It wasn't that. It was this journey that went along, and as I learned more, I got more committed to it. I got better at it. I learned more commitment, and the feedback I was getting was, people appreciated it, and so and I find that holds true today.
Yeah, I think it does as well, and I hope there's a lot of companies out there that follow the same tenets and serve their company the same way. So, as you know, this is a student community that we're speaking to today, and we do have representation from all over the world. I would like to take it back a little bit, and we'd love to learn a little bit about the student Howard Behar. What
Yeah,
were you like as a student?
terrible. That was the worst. I was a good learner on the things I was interested in, but I was not a great student. I barely got out of high school. I had 2 years of community college. And, I look back with those times with a regret. I didn't apply myself like probably I should have done at that time. And, but, it worked for me, and I was such a good learner. I learned, outside of school probably better than I learned inside of school. I was much more show me and let me do it than tell me, and
Sure.
so that worked for me. I don't advise it to anybody. I wouldn't let my kids. They
Sure.
both have a master's degree. My wife has a PhD. So, I'm the only uneducated one in my family.
So as you look back, let's say at your 20-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, um, well, if I were at 20, um, to figure out who you are, what you stand for, what your values are, and how those values inform the actions and the decisions you make in your life. Set goals, right, in all aspects of your life. Do your best to achieve those goals. Treat people with respect and dignity, and it's amazing how it all works out. My goals were never, I had economic goals, but I was never so much one that money was not a driving force in my life. um, you know, Spirituality was, family was, learning was, right? And money was there, and economic things, material things were there. They were part of it. But I had money. I didn't have money. I didn't feel differently about myself.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about your 6P philosophy.
Yeah.
Um, and I'd love to hear a little bit about in general, but I really want to dig into one that I also really struggle with, and you admittedly have struggled with, is patience. And I'd love to hear, maybe we start with that actually, and I'd love to hear what your grandkids have taught you about patience.
I have 6 of them. Let me tell you, they teach
Oh,
them.
wow.
Yeah. So, well, look, not everything comes in the time frame we want it to come in life, right? And there's another word that goes with patience. It's called persistence. And you have to be patiently persistent. You have to constantly be working towards your goals, but understand that not everything comes when you want it to come. Not everybody that you run into, is going to get things done in the time frame you want them to get done. Not everybody is going to do it in the way you want it to be done. And so you have to have patience with yourself, most importantly, but with other people too. And so it just goes as part of life. My grandkids, you have to have, they've taught me a lot about patience, because they don't always do what you want them to do. And you have to watch them. And particularly now, I watch, my grandkids are older now. My oldest grandchild is going to be 21 and my youngest is 13. And I found that I just have to support them in their journeys. My job isn't to tell them what to do. My job is to show them what I did and why caring about people is important in my life, and then they can make their own choices. But I watch them, and sometimes I push them, shove them a little bit, but in a kind and gentle way. But I have to have lots of patience with them, because they don't want me to tell them what to do.
Yeah, we've got six lucky grandkids, and that's it's really important to hear that. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the other 5 Ps, and kind of, if you wouldn't mind sharing with our audience what those are and what they kind of mean to you.
Yeah. So one time, how I got to all of this is, early on in my career, I was struggling, and with a leader that wanted me to be somebody other than who I was. And the problem was, is I didn't really know who I was. I was just Howard being Howard. It was long before the word servant leadership entered my lexicon, and before I even began to realize what it was all about. And so, because of that stress and that situation, I began the journey of trying to figure out who I was, what my values were. And so I identified my 8 to 10 core values, what my mission statement in life was, who I wanted to be, what I wanted to accomplish, and then how I wanted to live my life. And that's where I came up with my 6 Ps. So the first P is purpose. Everything I do in life has to have a purpose greater than myself. It has to be bigger than me. It isn't just about me. It's about serving others. And that's what I have found, that there's no role that any of us will play in our lives that isn't about serving others. That's all we're here put on earth to do. And when we do that, then we serve ourselves. So the second P is passion. If you got a purpose that's greater than yourself, bigger than yourself, then you darn well better be passionate about it. Scream it from the highest mountaintops. Have the energy behind it. Every day you get up and remember why you're there, to serve people. So then the third P is persistence, which I talked a little bit about. In the river of life, there are rocks around every bend. Some rocks we can see, some rocks somebody has told us about, so we know they're there. And there are many rocks that we put there ourselves, right? But there are a lot of rocks we don't see, and we go boom like that, and we hit them. And many rocks, like I said, we put there ourselves, and we hit them anyway. And persistence means that we constantly are working to get over, under, through, or over those rocks. And so persistence pays in life. There's one word I think that would describe every entrepreneur that I've ever known or worked with, and that's persistence. They don't know from no. As soon as I hear that word no, that just begins the journey for them. Then the fourth P is patience. Like I said, not everything comes in the time frame you want it to come, and you have to have patience with yourself and with others. And then the fifth P is performance. Performance matters in this world, and I don't care where it is in your life. Performance matters with yourself. Committed. When you make a commitment to yourself, then you got to get the job done. When you make a commitment to somebody else, you got to get the job done. When you make a commitment to your children to be at a soccer game and you're not there, that's not performance. When you make a commitment to your significant other or your spouse to have a monogamous relationship, then you better live up to those commitments. So performance matters in this world, and we're getting measured all the time by everybody we run into. We get measured by our significant other, our spouses. We get measured by our kids. We get measured by our coworkers. We get measured by our bosses. And human beings don't like to be measured. We don't like it. But the facts are we are being measured, and we will always be measured. And so performance matters in this world. You got to do what you say you're going to do. And then the sixth P, the most important P, people. Everything we do is about serving the people and serving others. And that's the driving force. And so those are my 6 P's, and that's how I try to live my life every day.
I'm latching on to what you said about performance outside of work. I mean, performance is everywhere with our families, with our children, our spouses. It's really important to take that into account, I think, in our own lives. So thank you for sharing. So next question is, I'm curious to hear the evolution of Starbucks and culture-wise, from when you started to as things grew and became to the point where it was a global organization, where I'm assuming it was very difficult to stay closely connected with people because it's a lot of people and it's difficult. So I'm curious to hear about the cultural change and how you manage that.
Well, I started at Starbucks when there were 28 stores. So it was a very small organization. Maybe there were 300 people total in the company. And so, when I got there, I realized early on that it wasn't about the coffee, it was about the people. But, the organization was driven towards coffee because that was our business. Like all entrepreneurial organizations, you're really focused on the product or the service that you're selling. And okay, I loved coffee. I was a coffee drinker long before I came to Starbucks. And so I love Starbucks coffee. I like stronger coffee and more full-bodied coffee. So, but as I was there a little while, I realized that we weren't in the coffee business serving people, but we were in the people business serving coffee. Sounds like a small play on words, but it really was meaningful. It was meaningful to me, and it became really meaningful to everybody within the organization. And that's what I tried to drive home, that the success or failure of Starbucks will be based on with people, not with the coffee. The coffee had to be good. Yeah, that was our product. But people drink coffee, people brew coffee, people grow coffee, people ship coffee, right? People create new coffee blends, people roast coffee. I mean, all the things you have to do to make a cup of coffee, people do. And so we had to focus on people. And as I have this equation that I just believe in: grow the people grow the organization, and the organization grows the business. So you help people to become better human beings, to be better at what they do. They will grow the organization. They will influence the new people coming into the organization and attract new people in the organization. And that organization will grow the business. By their combined efforts, they will grow the business. And that is just what happened at Starbucks. I remember when we had our first all company meeting where all the store managers came, and it was huge. We had about 7,000 people show up, and I remember Howard Schultz, who was a CEO and chairman of the board at the time. We were sitting down kind of in the front row, and we got up and we looked around and we said, how the hell did this happen? And it was true. They did it. It wasn't us. We knocked down the hurdles, we set the tone, we set the values, we set the mission, but it was the people that made it happen, not Howard or I.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, Starbucks has become really a lighthouse for other companies to kind of see through some of the things and challenges we're facing right now. And I'm curious your thoughts on, what types of companies or what kind of companies do we need to emerge right now, and what type of leadership, does the world need facing all these different, crises we are across the globe?
Well, there's a big, I don't like to call it a battle, but it is a battle between many business leaders that think that their whole deal is to make money, right? The bottom line, to serve their shareholders. I don't believe that. See, some leaders say they have to maximize profits. I think the idea is to optimize profits. And the difference between maximizing and maximizing means you're going to get every last dime you can get and for profits for our shareholders. Optimizing means that you're going to balance all of that out between all stakeholders, between our shareholders, the people that work in the organization, between our communities that we work in, and that we're going to contribute to society. We're going to make society a better place. You see, because if you don't do that, then you're not going to have a society or a community that moves forward. If it's all about greed and you're only taking for yourself, then how does that work? So, in the United States, where I'm from, the Declaration of Independence says, we the people. It doesn't say me, the people. And we're having a hard time with that right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're having a very difficult time because there's a lot of me, the people. Me, I'm not going to get a vaccine. Me, I want to make all the money I can make. Me, I'm all in it for myself, versus we. And the only way the world works over the long haul, the only way communities work over the long haul, the only way families work over the long haul is we. And that's the difficulty we're facing. And I think businesses have a unique responsibility to make sure that we're focusing on the we.
I couldn't agree more, and it is probably to simplify it, it's the biggest challenge we're facing right now as a country here in the United States. I couldn't agree with you more. And speaking of, young people, obviously, but also our culture today, we're in the midst of cancel culture and call out culture, right? Where these days businesses have to stand for something. And can you talk a little bit about how challenging that is for a business to stand for something when it could polarize you? How do you make those choices?
Well, I always found that if you're standing for people, right, caring about people, it's always the right choice. If you're here, if you understand you're here to serve your people that work in your organization first, and those people serve those human beings we call our customers, that it works. And the cancel culture isn't. We have very little patience for people that don't agree with us. I'm not any different. I get mad at people. People that won't get a vaccine. I say, how could you not do that?
Mm-hmm.
That isn't about you. That's not about you at all. That's about us. And that means that you have to take a risk sometimes. You have to give something of yourself in order to have other people be served. And so, cancel culture is kind of interesting. If we're going to sit here in judgment of everybody, right, it isn't going to work. But if you sit there in caring about others and you try to explain to others why you believe what you believe and why you think it's the right way, most of the time, particularly in the context of servant leadership, people will get it. If you're a religious person, right, then you have to be about we, right? Because all religion is about we. It's not about me at all. I don't care which religion it is. If you're Muslim, if you're Jewish, if you're Christian, if you're Buddhist, if you're Taoist, it doesn't make any difference. It's got to be about we, because all the great thinkers throughout history and religious doctrine have been about we. Now, some have done we with a hammer, which I don't believe is the right way to do it. I think, the we is done with gentleness and kindness and understanding. But it's we're in kind of difficult times right now. I don't know why now, you know, I thought we were heading, as growing up that we were learning and we were heading towards this more unified world and a world of caring and understanding. And it just doesn't feel that way right now. And it's unfortunate because there is no other answer. There is no way to get to the goal without caring about others. Impossible. It will never happen.
See, it just goes to show us how applicable this servant leadership is to everything in our lives, and not only in
Yeah.
our lives, but in our country, in our culture, in our day-to-day life, how important it is to be that servant to people and be good to people and honor values. That's just
Yeah.
it's incredible. So I'm curious, throughout your career and as you were growing and leading, who were your role models? Who did you look to for guidance or inspiration?
I was really lucky in my life. I was the third born in a family where my sister and my brother were each 10 and 13 years older than I was, respectively. So I was the baby. And my father was 50 when I was born. My mother was 37. In those days, that was quite old for parents to be, particularly for my mother to have a baby. I think I was, oops, that was by accident. And so, my parents were big influencers in my life, particularly my father. My father had a small mom and pop grocery store. He never had very much money, but we always had food on the table and uh, and clothes on our back. But we weren't rich. We were, everybody likes to say they're middle income. I would say we were less than middle income at the time. But anyway, but what I learned from him was that we were here to serve people. His customers were his neighbors and his friends. He had charge accounts. People would come in and they'd get their groceries and they'd leave. They wouldn't pay. End of the month, he'd send them a bill. And when people didn't have something, he kind of sensed it and he would give it to them for free. If they couldn't pay one month, he would let it go. And I watched that, as a little child. And there's a story in my life that took place when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I used to go to the store every day after school. And, I'd fool around and I'd eat cupcakes and whatever I could get my hands on, I was a chubby little kid. But one day I was standing up by the grocery store or by the register, and he was ringing out one of his customers. And he put everything in the bag. And then before the customer left, he said to me, "Howard, would you go get me a couple of baskets of strawberries?" So I brought the baskets of strawberries up, and my dad put the strawberries in the basket, and the customer left. And I was old enough to realize that my dad hadn't rung those strawberries up on the register. And so I said to him, I said, "Dad, you forgot to ring the strawberries up on the register." In those days, it was a hand crank register. There was no electricity to them. You pulled the crank and it rang it up, and there was a tape that came up, a paper tape that came up. And he said, "Howard, not everything we do in life do we need to get paid for." And he said, "I happen to know that those people like fruit and they particularly like strawberries. And right now they can't afford to buy those things. So it's just my way of saying thank you and caring about them." And, I didn't realize the lesson at the time, but I always remember that story. Not everything in life do we need to get paid for. And that's the way I think it needs to be. Not everything in life do we need to be rewarded for. Not everything in life do we need to be recognized for. And certainly not everything we do in life do we need to get paid for, right? We can do things out of the gentleness and kindness of our heart and caring about other human beings. And so that influence of my parents was great. And then along the way, I had just a number of people that cared about me, that influenced me, that taught me things. And one person in particular, a guy named Jim Jensen, who I'm still friends with today. And he was older than I was. And, he was the one that finally got me to understand that I could be or do anything that I wanted to do or be. That if whatever you think you can or can't do, you can, and you're right. I mean, whatever you think
Yeah.
you can't do, you're right. And he taught me how to set goals. He was the one that introduced me to servant leadership. And so he really began my journey of really growth as an adult and as a human being. And so, I still am friends with him today. And I always thank him profusely he changed my life. He absolutely did.
Oh, that's amazing. And thank you for sharing that story. It's inspiring. Um, and as a dad myself, I'm excited to hopefully instill some of those beliefs in my kids. But so we are currently upon the 50th anniversary of Starbucks. Do you have big plans to celebrate? What's the agenda look like?
Well, I don't think there's not a big event that I know about. At least they haven't invited me to it. I didn't reach. So, but I know about it and I'll be involved in it. And of course, we'll be drinking great coffee and I'm part of, we have an alumni association, which I'll be part of. I am part of, and we're having an event tonight actually. And so I'll be at that on Zoom. I won't go because of COVID, but yeah, I mean, it's a big time, 50 years. That's
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, everybody thinks that Starbucks just started, but it's 50 years old.
Yeah, it's quite impressive. Well, I have one. So we have a lot of questions coming in from students that I want to get to, but I want to ask one last question, and that is, when you go to Starbucks now, what is your coffee order, and do they spell your name right?
Well, I order a triple tall Americano. That's 3 shots of espresso and about 6 to 8 ounces of water.
Wow.
And, and that's what I drink. And I usually drink a couple of those a day. And, by the time if I get a third one, I become invisible. You yeah, so that's what I drink. And do they spell my name right? Yeah, sometimes, Howard, they get that one. Yeah, they try, they make their best attempt. I am, have we done everything right at Starbucks? No. Are we perfect? No, not by any stretch of the imagination. But I am incredibly proud of the organization and the people in the organization. And for all the mistakes we've made, we've always corrected as best as we can. And we have treated people for the most part with respect and dignity. And the journey has been a wonderful one. When I go in and I see something great happening at Starbucks, like how a barista is treating one of the customers and how they talk to them, it kind of makes me proud.
Mhm.
That we truly are in the people's business serving coffee, and that we have focused on that. And you know, Starbucks BHAG, I plagiarized from myself for my mission statement, but it goes like this: we want to be one of the most well-known and respected organizations in the world, known for nurturing and inspiring the human spirit. Nothing about how much coffee was going to sell, how much money we were going to make, nothing about that, but only basically about being well-known and respected and known for nurturing and inspiring the human spirit. It's all about the people.
Oh, I love it. That's well said. And honestly, it's just it's beautiful, really is. And it's something hopefully that other companies can aspire to. So if it's okay with you, Howard, I'd love to ask you some questions from our student community, student crowd, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And let's get started with what can you do if you want to adopt a style of behavior like you're talking about, but the company environment is negative? How can you personally change things around you?
Well, you can only fix you. You can only be you and act you. And so you can set the tone and the example in your organization. Let's say that you're in Starbucks and you're a manager of a store within a district of 10 stores, right? And I'm making this up, but let's say that 9 of the stores aren't being managed as a servant leader. Well, you can be a servant leader within your surroundings, within your store, and you can set the tone and example. And over time, what happens, people begin to see something different in you, and they wonder what's going on in your store. And somebody says, I think I'm going to try to copy that. And I want to be that. And they come and they learn from you. So you can do what you can do. And you can talk about it. You can talk about why you believe in it and why you believe it's the best way to lead an organization. But, obviously servant-led organizations, work best when the people at the very top are servant leaders. It's difficult in an organization when the people at the top are autocratic leaders to have a servant-led company. But having said that, then you have a choice. if you don't feel that you can help change the organization, then you have the ability, if you save your money, you have money in the bank, to go someplace else. You know, you're free to do that, particularly in our Western societies. Nobody is keeping you under lock and key. And so maybe you got to go find a place that is servant led. But I always believe, make the attempt to make change within your organization by being the servant leader yourself. People notice, you know, believe it or not, people notice, and they talk about it. Others talk about it, just like they talk about people that aren't servant leaders, right?
Absolutely.
Probably all the people that are listening today have worked in an organization or been part of an organization where somebody in the organization is not very nice. And people talk about that person. Well, they equally talk about the person that is caring and does serve. So
Absolutely.
be that person and do your best to change your organization. And if you find that you can't, then find another place where you can.
Did you, so on the same topic, did you, with Starbucks as it grew, did you face folks that were struggling with this kind of a culture, and how did you change that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We were hiring lots and lots and lots of people all the time. And we always tried to interview for who they were as a person first. I hardly ever asked any questions about, their skill sets, particularly if they were in things that I knew nothing about. Other people's job was to find that out. I only talked about who they were as a person. What were their values? I always asked, the first question I asked is, tell me what your 3 core values are. 3 of your core values are. And, it was amazing how many people could not identify what 3 of their core values were. Never even thought about it, and, that's okay. And, I would say you might want to start thinking about that. And I'd ask questions about what was the most difficult situation they ever had with another human being and how did they resolve it? And so I wanted to know who they were as a person first, and then what their skill sets were, because who they were as a person mattered much more than we can teach people lots of things. It's difficult to teach people values.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So anyway, that's how I always approached it, is I just kept driving that home.
So it's interesting you say that that's a challenging question to answer, and honestly, I'm thinking in my head how challenging that might be for me. So I'm curious to hear what your 3 core values are.
Well, the first core value is honesty. The second core value is trust. Give trust before you get trust. Third core value is love. Give love before you get love.
Awesome. I think we could all probably take a lot from that, and words to live by for sure. Let's move on to another student question. Do you know of other large organizations like Starbucks that follow the same tenets of servant leadership or something similar?
Yeah, a company called Costco, the big warehouse company.
Yeah.
Costco is definitely a servant-led company. They treat their people with respect, with dignity. They pay them well, and people like working at Costco. I would say the Container Stores out of Texas, servant-led company. I would have said, well, I won't say who I would have said. Yeah, I think there's lots of servant-led companies. I'm more familiar with the retail ones than anything else. I'd say it's a servant-led company. There are a lot of companies. They may not call it servant-led. They might call it transformationally led companies. They may call them conscious capitalists, something like that. John Mackey from Whole Foods is a conscious capitalist, and there's lots of companies that treat people well. And so that doesn't mean every company is perfect.
Of course.
They're not. Lots of companies make mistakes all the time, and it's people making mistakes. It's not companies. It's people. People lead companies. Companies don't lead themselves. And so, but yeah, there's lots. All you got to do is look around. The way you find out is you start talking to people that work in those companies. And one good question to always ask: every company will have a mission statement, right? In today's world, every company has a mission statement. So ask the question: what's the gap between what companies say in their mission statement and what they do in the place that you work? And then ask another question. What happens when you make a mistake in a company,
Mm,
right?
absolutely.
What happens when you do something right in a company? You know, and
Absolutely.
you know, people. I do a lot of talking with college students. You know, and then I say, well, I got to take that job. If I get an offer, I got to take that job. No, you don't. No, you don't. I mean, you know, you wouldn't walk down the street and see a handsome man or a beautiful woman and say, "Would you marry me?" I'm getting, well, maybe somebody would. I don't know. But let's get married until you know who they are, because values are a lot more important than looks, aren't they? So you shouldn't join a company until you find out who the company really is. And you can only do that by doing your work, by talking to people that work in the organization. And so none of us are victims here. You know, if you need money for food on the table, go get a job at Starbucks for a while. You know, you can be a bar for a while until you become whatever it is that you're going to be on your way to something else, you know, or whatever it is. You know, you can always find a way to put food on the table.
Mhm.
But if you're going, you know, you can find out about, you know, if you want to work for Starbucks, talk to people that work at Starbucks. Find out what their experience has been. Not everybody will have the same great experience. That's the way it is, because we work for people, not companies, you know? So find out, you know, who the people are that work in the companies, where you want to work, what kind of leader you want to work with, and how a company treats its people.
Absolutely. So this is a perfect segue into another question, which is what made you join Starbucks in the first place, and what was your first role there?
It was totally accidental. I was president of a land development company that we sold because I got in trouble. And I was in my mid 40s or early 40s. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I got interested in the specialty food business. And I wanted to buy a business. And so along the way, somebody introduced me to this young guy named Howard Schultz, who had bought Starbucks. He had been an employee at Starbucks, and he was looking for a VP of operations. And you know, we sat down and had breakfast one morning, and he had this long list of criteria. He had 10 items on his list. Number one, he wanted somebody who had a college degree. I didn't have that. Second thing, he wanted somebody with food service experience. Finally, we got number 10. Can you breathe? Yes, I could breathe, but that was I think that I fit on the list. And so we parted ways. And a year later, I finally found a company to buy, and it was a franchise for a company called Hickory Farms. I could, for Oregon, Washington, British Columbia. Two friends of mine owned it. And so I had an opportunity to buy it from them. And I didn't have any money, right? So I had to go to my brother-in-law to get some money. And my brother-in-law said, I don't know anything about franchising, but I know somebody that does. And it happened to be a guy that had invested in Starbucks. Starbucks didn't franchise, but this guy was helping Howard Schultz grow Starbucks. And he was an older guy, a guy named Jack Rogers. He just passed away. One of the most wonderful human beings I've ever known. So we went to visit that Jack. And Jack, I'm pitching my heart out of why I want to buy this company and why my brother-in-law should loan me the money to do it. And Jack said, what do you want to do something like that for? We need a guy like you right here at Starbucks. Well, you could have heard my brother-in-law's sigh of relief, probably up from Seattle all the way down to Los Angeles. You know, he wouldn't have to loan me money if I got a job, right? My sister would be happy. Everything would be right in
Yeah.
the world. And so, and I said, well, I'd been down that road with Howard Schultz before, and you know, we didn't fit. He says, yeah, we still haven't filled that position, and you're perfect for it. I want you to talk to Howard again. I think you'd be perfect. And so I did, and I met with Howard again, and I said to Howard, before you before you decide whether I'm right or not, and before I make any commitments, how about if I work in the company for a week? You don't pay me. I just work in the company for a week. And here's what I want to do. I want to work in the plant, the roasting plant, for a couple of days. I want to work in the stores for 3 days or 4, whatever it was. And I want to work in the trucks for a couple of days, delivering coffee. And I did that. And by the end of that first week, I figured this was the place for me. I just connected. You know, I figured out early on that we were in the people business, and that drove me. That was my life. That was how I thought about things. And Howard fortunately extended an invitation for me to join, and I accepted, and the rest is history. So I just turned right instead of turning left. There's an old saying that a quote that I love. It's about luck. Luck is where opportunity meets preparation. And, the opportunity came up and I was prepared and I said yes, and somebody said yes to me. And so that's how it happened. I never regretted it one day. Did I like it every day? No. Howard and I would argue like cats and dogs, there were days when it was painful, but I loved it.
That's fantastic. I love the idea of jumping on for a week just to understand different parts of the business. And
Yeah.
you were a trendsetter before you even knew it. Now there's a TV show, Undercover Boss. I mean, you were the first.
Yeah.
You were
Right.
the first iteration of that.
I always
Um,
laugh about that, undercover boss. And they're so surprised.
yeah.
Like, yeah, really? You don't need to be undercover to find out what's going on in your company.
Right.
You
Exactly.
better be. I was in the stores all the time. The first question I'd ask Bartis is, how we doing? What's working for you? What's not working for you? What should we change? What do you like? I didn't ask how business was. Who are you? Where did you come from? Why did you start at Starbucks? That's what I was interested in. And over time, you'd learn lots of things. You don't need to be undercover to find that stuff out.
Absolutely. I'd love hearing about it. So this question might be a challenging one. It's from a student who says, I don't have a purpose yet. I don't know mine. I'm going to graduate soon to start my career. What should I do?
Well, start thinking about it. First of all, let's start at the beginning. Okay, let's start ask the question of yourself, who are you? What matters to you? What are your values? So here's an easy way to do it. Go online and you'll find, and type in human values. And you'll find websites that have lists of words that represent human values, right? And then go on that list and select 50 of those words that represent who you see yourself as. These are your values. Then take those 50 and get them down to 8 to 10. It doesn't mean that there aren't more than 8 to 10 that you live by, but what are your core values? My first core value is honesty. It's everything to me. That's everything. It really drives my life. Honesty, when I go to tell a white lie, I can't stand myself. Honesty is important. It's a core value. So what are your core values? Define those first. Then figure out, what is your mission in life? What is it you want to leave behind? Let's say you're 21 or 22 years old or 23, whatever you are, and you're graduating from college. Okay. Try to think about what you would, when people were describing you 50 years hence, what would they say about you? Here's what I want them to say about me. I want them to say, he set out to nurture and inspire the human spirit, and he did it. Nice. He said he wanted to always care about people and serve people, and he did it. That's me. That's how I want you to describe me, if I live up to that. So what is it you want to live up to? So, and remember, none of these things are written in stone. You can change any one you want. Write them in pencil so you can erase, a different value, different something. And then write down a paragraph of how you want to live your life. And then set goals for yourself. So, my wife and I have a 5-year plan. And in that plan, we have headings: spirituality, material, economic, our marriage, our grandchildren, our children, travel, our environment. And we said, and what we call now our life's work, which used to be called our career. And we set 3 to 5 goals under each one of those. And some of them are individual goals for me personally, and some are for my wife personally, but some of them are for our together as a couple. So what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? Right? When I was about 25 years old, and I started doing this work, right? I had an economic goal that I wanted to make $30,000 a year by the time I was 30. I wanted to make my age, and at that time I was probably making about $800 a month. That was a big stretch. I was going to have to triple my income, in 5 or 6 years. I had no idea how I was going to do it. But I set the goal, and then I started focusing on things that I could do. And that wasn't the driving force in my life. When I got married, we wanted to have children. So that was part of our goals. In my career, I wanted to have the opportunity to lead a company. I had all different kinds of goals. I had spiritual goals, I had goals of friends that I wanted to keep and friends I wanted to make. I wanted to be a citizen of the world. I wanted to travel. I wanted to not just see churches. I wanted to meet people. I wanted to know how other people felt and why they felt that way and how different cultures acted. So What are your goals in your life? So develop a little plan for your life. So, and your greater purpose will start to pop out. You don't need it, you don't have to have this. You can make it a shorter term purpose. Maybe your purpose over the next 5 years is to really maybe let's say that you're into technology. Maybe over the next 5 years, you want to really educate yourself in AI, artificial intelligence. I don't know what it would be. And by the 5 years from now, you want to be one of the best there is in AI. I don't know, but so, your purpose will start to form as you start doing things and you start to experiment and take on jobs. But you should know who you are, what your values are, because those values should inform the decisions you make on where you go to work,
Mm.
who you work with. That's really important. And you got to write this stuff down. Otherwise, like I said before, it's just wishes, hopes, and dreams. If you don't write it down, you don't mean it.
I love the exercise on finding your core values. That's something that if I ask somebody that on the street right now, I would bet 1 out of 10 might give me an answer.
If you were lucky.
If I'm lucky,
you were
yeah.
lucky.
I mean,
First they'd say, what?
yeah. What do you mean? Absolutely. No, I think it's a fantastic,
But you
especially
can get ahead of all this. All the people that are listening to this, look, at only 2% of the people are going to do this work. So you can be one of those 2%, but you got to do the work. And it is work, by the way. It's work. It's not easy.
I just think that's fantastic advice for anybody that's, about to graduate or in school. Figure out first the values, the core values that you hold dear. I think that's just incredible advice. So thank you for that. The same student, she asks, what advice would you give to those who need to stay motivated for this type of leadership or this style of leadership?
Mean to keep going? Well,
yeah.
Yourself, how do you treat people? Are you there to help others get what they want out of life? Or are you there to get what you want out of life? Are you focused on the we and not the me? And read. There's tons of books on servant leadership. Robert Greenleaf's got a number of books. James Autry's got a couple of books on servant leaders. Max Dupree wrote a great book on leadership that's basically on servant leadership. There's tons. Just open yourself up and read and read about people that lead that way. And it doesn't, by the way, you might find that doesn't call it servant leadership. Maybe it's transformational leadership. Maybe it's conscious capitalism. Read about things like that, and then experiment and make it your own. Make it your own. Find your own words to describe it, so it becomes internal and intrinsic inside of you. It becomes you, and you are it.
Absolutely. Well, another question from one of our viewers is really, he's looking for advice on dealing with competitiveness in leadership and among friends, and how to set himself apart there, I guess.
Well, we all compete, but we compete mostly against ourselves, against our nature, against our worst instincts and our best instincts. And so that, to me, is the most important competition, is you. Are you going to listen to the negative influences that on your board of directors that sit on your shoulder talking to you all the time? You're going to listen to the positive influencers. And so to me, that's the most important. Yeah. I never thought in my life that I competed against my coworkers. I just didn't think that way. I don't think we need to think that way. I wanted to make the organization great. I wanted to have the organization be successful. And I always felt that if I helped do that, then I'd get recognized for it. And, so that meant that I had to help other people be successful.
I love it.
And if you do that first, it just seems to work. I have a quote that I love too. You can't win a negotiation like you can't win a marriage. Right. And it's kind of applicable here. If you're constantly trying to compete and outdo somebody else in your organization, you're the one that loses in the end. But if you're constantly trying to build somebody else up and help somebody else be successful, you'll be successful.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So I guess another question would be, with regarding virtual connections, right? It's important to make those human connections, and
Yes.
now everything seems to be going virtual. What advice would you give to the younger folks that, obviously who can't be in person? How do we make those connections, albeit virtually?
Well, I mean, you and I are doing it right now. I mean, I tell you the truth now, I'm old, so, I've been afraid of getting COVID because I'd had strokes and I'd had cancer, and I've been very careful. So I've been doing most everything I have done on Zoom. I've given speeches, I talk to people, and I've gotten comfortable. I think that you have to communicate, 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 communicate. You have to show your emotion and your passion on Zoom, right? If I was just sitting there, oh, well, what do you ask me another question? Oh, right? Versus showing that I care and that I'm passionate about my life. You can see that, I hope, right? We don't have to be sitting right next to each other. Now, there's nothing like being able to touch somebody. I agree. I'm a high touch person. So, I miss that, but I don't let that get me. I'm still there doing it. And I've given tons and tons of speeches on Zoom and talk to people all the time on Zoom, and we have great conversations. So, if communication was needed to be at a level 5 before COVID, then it needs to be at a level 15 today, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so if you thought that, a little bit was good, let me tell you, way more is better, because that's what we need. And we need to constantly be talking with each other. How do you make a great relationship work at home? Is communicate, communicate, communicate. If two people can be living together and not communicate, right?
Absolutely.
So so Zoom is not an excuse, or COVID is not an excuse. You got to, whatever vehicle you have to communicate, in person, not in person, use it, and do more, not less.
I feel like it comes back to come back to the performance piece, right? Like
Yeah,
we have to perform virtually just as we do in person, and almost, like as you're saying, even to try harder because it is more
yeah,
difficult. So couldn't agree
exactly.
more. Absolutely. Well, Howard, it's been incredible, from learning about your 6 Ps to learning more about servant leadership. Um, any closing thoughts for the students with us today? And any pieces of advice you would give them as 18 to 24-year-olds?
Sure. Well, there's a quote, I'm a quote guy, so I have them all over my office wall. And it goes like this: if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. Live your life with intention. Figure out who you are. What are your top 8 to 10 core values? What are you here on this earth to do? What is your mission in life? What are you here to do? How are you here to do it? Your 6 Ps. How do you want to do it? And write it down. If it's not written down, then it's just wishes, hopes, and dreams. When you write it down, then you're committing to it because you're going to look at it all the time. Set goals. Know where you're going and what you want to accomplish. Set spiritual goals, who you are as a spiritual person. Set goals for your significant other, for your families. If you're married, if you have a significant other in life, set goals together. What kind of education do you want to have? How much money do you want to make? That's fine too. What kind of house do you want to live in? What kind of human being do you want to be? Have goals written down, 3 to 5 goals in each area. Have a 1, 3, and 5-year plan for your life. And it's amazing what you can accomplish when you commit yourself.
I love that. I love that. It again comes back to performance. We have to be mindful and diligent about the way that we set goals and the way we live our lives. And I found so much value in this conversation. And Howard, I can't thank you enough. And I know the students that join us today are feeling the same way, that they've had an opportunity to engage with you and ask questions. It's been extremely valuable. And we'll again see you again this afternoon.
Okay, well, before we get off, so here's my cell phone number and my email address for anybody out there that wants to talk or send me an email. My email address is hb, my initials, hb at howardbehar.com, at howardbehar.com. And my cell phone number is 206-972-7776. I'm a little slow to get back, but I'll always return your email or your call if you do it.
Wow, that's extremely generous and gracious. And thank you again, Howard. And we will speak to you again this afternoon. Hopefully obviously not so early in the morning. So keep caffeinated, and we'll talk again later this afternoon. It's been a pleasure and an honor. So
Hey, Josh,
thank you
thank
again,
you.
Howard.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.